Yo guys, Jens here, and today I want to talk about the changes that I would like to see in PvP this week at least. I'm on the character screen so I don't forget any class or spec, so let's do this. I'm gonna start with the warrior, and I think right now the problem with warrior, by the way, I want to demystify some of the problems people think classes have, and I don't want only to nerf, I want to buff them in other ways. Okay, so I love the meta, I love the fact that it's fast paced, but I think some classes have some weird interactions where they are just way too strong. So, and I want to fix that. So, as for Warrior, Arms Warrior, I think they are in a really good place, but they have some problems that make them a little bit over the top and probably the best melee spec in the game. It's arms. So for arms, what I would love to see is first a nerf to intervene. I think intervene is one of the strongest spells in the game, and it lasts for 6 seconds, and it's pretty much a deter from every melee attack to the warrior. So what I would like to see is just nerf the intervene either by duration from 6 seconds to 3 seconds, let's say, or 2 seconds, or just make it like 2 or 3 attacks and it's fixed. Another thing that warriors have is extreme tankiness, and that's due to ignore rage only costing 40 rage. So I would like to see a nerf on ignore pain by increasing the amount of rage, so warriors actually have to think about pressing it before they just spam it. So you either you either do damage or you either go defensive. I would also like to see a small nerf with an interaction that I think it's kind of bad for the game, which is the Ventir ability Condemned with that sentence PvP talent. I don't think that sentence should work with Condemn above 75% HP. So yeah, they should fix that. Um, the rest, I think it's pretty much fine. I think the damage is kind of fine. Like even the execute proc, even though you might nerf it by like 2% or 3%, I think everything else is fine. And even with these nerfs, warriors will still be a really good melee class and probably still the best melee in the game. As for Fury, I think the problem right now is just the damage from what I've been hearing. So just increase that by a little bit. I still think arms should be the PvP spec. I'm one of those old guys that think some specs are just bad overall for the game. So and Fury it's one of them because whenever it's good, it's because it's broken, not because it's in a good state for the game. And I think that of other specs, which I'm gonna say as well. So I would just buff, yeah, nerf warriors, ignore rage, intervene, and I think they would be completely fine. Okay, so going to the next one, hunters. I think hunters are pretty in a really balanced state. I think if you don't see as many hunters, it's because other classes are a bit stronger. I think survival has a lot of sustained damage. MM has a lot of burst and a lot of sustained damage and can finish off targets. So I think they're in a pretty good state. BM, I'm actually happy that for the first time in the first season it's not the best hunter spec, so I think they are actually in a really good state. Now, as for mages, I think fire needs a nerf on combust. I think combust just, regardless of you pressing a defensive cooldown, I think combust goes through the defensive cooldowns and they need a little nerf on that. So I would nerf combustion crit damage or something. I don't know what you can do to nerf combustion, but I would nerf combustion and I would buff the overall damage with fireball buff, with the scorch buff, with the fire blast small buff, and with the pyroblast buff. But once again, I don't think fire should be the PvP spec. I think frost should be the best mage spec, and that spec needs a buff. Um, I think Frostbolt hits for way too less. Like it hits for 6k, I think, crits, and it's a cast. You have instants that do way too much more damage than that, or the same amount of damage with less hustle. So I would buff like a bit of Ice Lance, like by 2%. I would buff Frostbolt damage by around I don't know 5%, and I would buff flurry damage by 2%. I think frost should be the spec. I think if you get shattered by a frost mage, you should feel it. Arcane, I'm not gonna talk too much because I don't know much of the about the spec. And by the way, guys, this is all PvP changes, okay? And I think mages need a huge nerf in the new legendary that allows you to wear 3 barriers whenever you press barrier. I think that spell needs a huge nerf. That legendary needs a huge nerf because you're making mages tankier than boomkins, shadow priests, and obviously warlocks. So I think that needs a nerf. As for rogues, I think they're completely fine. I don't know. Sub has a lot of burst still. In fact, I think both of the NA and the US ladders are led by sub rogues, so I think they're completely fine after nerf. One thing that I would actually like to see is a nerf to this cooldown reduction legendary. Whenever you vanish, you reduce your cooldowns by 20 seconds, which means that blind doesn't desync with the enemy healer trinket, and I don't think that's a good interaction. So I would just remove blind from that interaction with Subrogue, and the rest I think it's fine. Maybe a small sustained damage buff, like to Shadow Strike or Eviscerate, but other than that I think it's fine. Asa, I think it's completely fine. Maybe a small buff, but I think it's fine. It's just all the other melees being way too strong. Outlaw, I can't really talk about it. I think it's fine as well. But like Asa, it's just that with current melee being so strong that you don't really have a place. As for priests, Shadow, I'm gonna talk about Shadow. I think Shadow is actually completely fine. I could see a nerf though, because they are one of the better casters, because they are just so tanky. I would like to see a nerf to Rate of Fate in cooldown, so it's 45 seconds. I think it should be a minute. And by the way, all the changes I'm proposing need to be together. You can't like nerf Greater Fate for Shadow Priest and then not nerf Windwalkers, for example, or Warriors or anything else, because it's an ecosystem. So you can't really make changes without affecting other classes. So I would like to see a Greater Fate nerf, and I would like to see for example, a 1 minute Greater Fate, and I would actually like to see their survivability going back again into shields, like it was previously in TBC, Wrath of the Lich King, and Kata. Shadow Priest shields were pretty good, and I think they should be pretty good. But right now, it's not really the shields, it's just the Void Shift, Dispersion, Greater Fate, and you're just way too tanky, so I would see a nerf to Greater Fate. I would like a nerf to Greater Fate, a nerf to Damnation, and a nerf to Unfurling Darkness. I think there should be no caster with dots, where all the dots are instants, because it just makes it a better Affliction Warlock, because it's tankier, it does almost the same amount of damage if free casting, so yeah. Other than that, I think they're fine. Disc Priests, I think they are super fine. And Holy Priest, I really don't know, so I can't talk. Now, to my main. I would like to see an Affliction nerf and buff. Okay, so here I would like to see a buff in their survivability. I think people who say, and I actually got this on yesterday when I was on the EU forums, people just told me learn to kite when they don't understand that if you kite you don't do damage. Every time you're not casting Malefic Rapture with full dots, you're doing 0 damage because your dots are super bad. So What I would like to see, it's a small survivability buff. So demon armor, instead of increasing the armor, just reducing all damage by 20%, between 15 and 20%, and giving you like a buff for healing taken. So like let's say 5 or 10% increased healing on you, which would certainly help, and it wouldn't be way too strong because affliction is the squishiest class by far. Okay, they don't have the movement of a mage, even though people are saying we have a lot of movement. Still, you can also go night fae. Okay, and you will see, for example, warriors start going night fae the longer the game is, or the longer the expansion is out. So yeah, in terms of nerfs, I would like to see a nerf to the corruption slow, either by the percent it slows or just putting up a duration like Curse of Exhaustion, like 12 seconds. Sorry for that. And I would like to see a Shadow Bolt buff, at least 200%. It shouldn't hit for 500 with Nightfall, it should hit for around 3 to 4k. I would like to see that. And the Malefic Rapture nerf. I don't think Malefic Rapture is good in PvP because it makes this whole thing of playing with a melee just impossible, because you can't cast, you're gonna be focused on kicks, which means if you play with the melee, it feels like the class is super weak, and if you play with the caster, it feels like the class is overpowered. So you just nerf Malefic Rapture, increase dot damage, increase Shadow Bolt damage, increase survivability, and the feeling will be the same, either playing with a melee or playing with a caster. We won't be extremely overpowered when free casting, because that's what Malefic Rapture does, and we won't be extremely weak when not being able to cast. Okay. As for demo, like Fury and like BM, I don't think it should be a spec in PvP because it has way too much control. It has 3 stuns, fears, and everything else that the warlock brings, as CS, a mortal strike. It's just way too much. Okay, so I think it shouldn't be a thing. And as for Destro, I think Destro problem right now is just other melees just railing you and just being able to kill you, and you not being able to cast Chaos Bolts because you're just dead if you tank these melees, right? So with all the fixes, I think Destro it's in a really good spot. It's actually better than Affliction in terms of spots. It just needs the meta to not one-shot you, pretty much. Okay, now let's go to Paladins. Paladins need a huge nerf, and it's not only Rat that actually has a problem, and I'm gonna say why. As for prot, it shouldn't be a thing. Like, I don't mind tanks in the game. Like, even in Wrath of the Lich King, you had KFC and Mancleave, which was always with a prot warrior. What I do mind is when tanks bring so much utility, they can actually replace a healer as well. So I don't mind Prot Paladin bringing some utility. What I do mind is them topping people off with instant heals. And this is another thing that I'm gonna say. I think hybrid healing should be nerfed by at least 50% in some cases. First, what I would like, and I'm gonna speak about Holy, is a nerf to Holy Shock and a nerf to Word of Glory. Why? Because if you check the good Paladin's healing, those will be the top healings, and those are instants. Okay, and we shouldn't be. There should be no healer that tops people with just instants. It has no place. It removes all the skill required to play. So in terms of Holy Paladin and Paladins across the board, I would like to see a nerf to Word of Glory by at least 50 to 60%. And I know this seems a lot, but I think it's needed. And I would love to see a buff to Flash of Light and Holy Light by 30 to 40%. I think if a Paladin casts Holy Light, they should be able to top someone because the cast is super long. And I think if you Word of Glory shouldn't be the norm in PvP because it just makes the PvP super frustrating for the enemy team. You're on the Holy Paladin or you're on one of their DPSs and they never cast. They cast like 3-4 Holy Lights. So yeah, in terms of nerf, in terms of nerf, what I would like to see it for red is just the burst turned into sustain. So it's not really a nerf. What I would like is just reduce the effectiveness of Divine Tool and Wings and bring that to sustain damage. So the difference between burst in wings and burst without wings shouldn't be as much as it is. So just nerf Divine Tool, nerf Red Wings, and just buff the overall damage by almost the same amount. Not the same amount because you shouldn't be able to one tap people. In terms of pro, just remove all healing from them, decrease all healing tanks can do in arena, and it should be fine. On to Druids. I think Druids right now are in a really good spot. Rest of Druids, you start to see more of them as gear progresses and they acquire the legendary, so you actually start to see a lot more Druids. But there are two specs that are completely broken in PvP, and we've been talking about one, but Feral, it's also extremely broken. So I think the problem here is Boomkins being able to star search people for 12k. It's an instant. It hits more than Chaos Bolt does for Destro with cooldowns up, and it shouldn't hit for that much. What I would like to see Boomkins actually get is first, Convoke shouldn't be as effective, even though it's a one-trick pony and we all know it's coming until we see the buffs and see that they are actually smart and they go Kyrian, which is even more overpowered than Convoke. Um, but Convoke needs a nerf regardless, so you nerf Convoke, effectiveness in PvP, and then what you nerf about Boomkins is just Star Surge. Star Surge should never hit for more than 5k, ever. Regardless of cooldowns, regardless of what you're doing, it should never be above 5k because it's an instant. You can see the Astral Power, yes, but it has no counterplay, okay? So I would just nerf Star Surge. I would nerf a little bit, not too much, but a little bit of their ability to tank, and I think they're fine. As for Ferals, I think Ferocious Bite hitting for 10k, at least on an Affliction Warlock, I think it's way too much. And I've seen cases where Ferals actually just Ferocious Bite me 3 times in 3 seconds, and I don't know what that is, but that needs a nerf. I don't. It wasn't Convoke either, so I think that needs a nerf. And other than that, just increase maybe a little bit of bleed damage, maybe just the combo point builder, which is Shred, and they should be still in a really good spot. They are really good at the moment. So yeah. Shamans. I think Elemental, and this might be stupid to say, but I think Elemental is fine, and I don't play with one as a main team, okay? Um, I remember in Rat, Elemental being extremely strong and being able to kill people from 80% if they had enough procs. And right now it feels exactly like that, so I don't want to see a nerf to that. Maybe what you can do is just increase lightning bolt damage a little bit and decrease the Stormkeeper damage and decrease a little bit of lava burst, but not by much, right? Because we want elementals to be able to not one tap, but if you're 50% and an elemental comes at you with procs, you should be really scared. So I think they're kind of fine. I think it's just switching the damage, the burst damage to more sustain, like lightning bolt buff would be more than fine. So yeah. As for enhancement, I would do the same. I think right now their burst it's just way too strong. But the problem with the enhancement ain't even the burst. It's actually the healing. I think, and like I said, hybrid healing shouldn't be a thing. It should be a thing, but it shouldn't top people off. You shouldn't be able to prevent an enemy team go by just healing it to full, right? If a fire mage pops combust, you shouldn't be able to out heal it, right? As a hybrid, so yeah, hybrid healing really needs to be looked at. In terms of resto, I think they should be made they should have to cast more. Like Holy Paladins, they actually cast a bit more than Holy Paladins, but if you check in the end of the game, like Riptide is just always their strongest healing. So I would just nerf Riptide and I would buff the healing, the casted healing by a bit. And I think they should be fun. They are super fun right now. I don't think they are OP. I think Holy Paladin is actually the strongest healer, and yeah, monks. I'm gonna start by saying Mistweaver is super bad and it needs a buff, but I don't know how. The problem with Mistweaver, I feel, is that if you face like a triple purge team or a double purge team, you just go home in under a minute. You can't out heal. So hot, it's really not the way to go. I think they should get a buff on initial healing of every single spell. I think Cocoon should get maybe a small buff, like a 2% buff, 3, 5%. But the problem with monks is, like in BFA, if you buff Cocoon too much, then you go to dampening games regardless of what the enemy team does. So I don't want Cocoon to be an extremely strong cooldown. I want it to be strong, but not super strong. I think at the moment the problem is that they rely too much on HOTS and their initial healing it's not strong, so I would like to see a buff to that. Now, in terms of Windwalker, Windwalker is super strong. The only problem they have is survivability, but that will get buffed once Reds and Warriors get nerfed. And so what I would like to see Windwalker is their images being super nerfed. I think the images is what makes them super strong. With weapons of order, I also think weapons of order should get a nerf. It lasts for way too long in PvP. I think it should only last for 10 seconds in PvP. It lasts for 30. That's way too long. And I think that if you nerf weapons of order and images damage, which most of the times it's as high as the Windwalker's damage, I think they will be completely fine. I think they need sustained damage, but I don't think they should have this amount of sustained damage where they can actually out damage an affliction warlock and a shadow priest, which are just multi-daughters. I don't think that should be a thing. So, and this in a single target, obviously. So I think they should nerf that, and the rest I think it's kind of fine. Okay, to demon hunters now. Demon hunters are fine, contrary to what people say. It's just other melee are just way too strong. I think demon hunters are fine. I think they need a nerf in the hunt and maybe a small buff to damage, but otherwise they are just fine. People just have been complaining about it, and I get it. But I think their problem, it's the same problem that warrior faced during BFA, which is other melee are just better. Okay, it's not about your class, it's about the others being just better. I've faced some demon hunters, some really good demon hunters, and the damage is there. So if the damage is there, you can't really do much more with this class. This class is super easy to play. This class doesn't really have an insane skill cap level. The class is fine. You just need to start using your mobility to survive and wait for other melees to be nerfed. This class is actually super good in terms of damage. Um, and I would say it's the same with DK. DK right now, the problem with DK is just Other melee are so strong that DK makes DK and Demon Hunter seem so weak. Like their damage is completely fine, their pressure is fine. What I would like to see about Unholy is maybe a small buff to Necrotic Strike. I think it should be better than any other spell you have, than Score Strike or Claw of Shadows. I think that should be the go-to run spender in PvP. So I would love to see a buff to Necrotic Strike, and I think the rest will just come naturally once the melee specs chill a bit, right? And that's it, boys. Like, I hope they don't over nerf and they don't over buff stuff, and I hope that before they actually, like, for example, for Warlock, I asked 20% damage reduction, but, but maybe just increase it by 15% and see how it is, right? Like, I don't hope, I'm hoping for the game to be fast paced, and for that to happen, we can't over nerf stuff, so we just need to nerf stuff that have weird interactions, like Boomy Kyrian just one shotting with Star Surges or Convoke, and we need to nerf that, or Red's Divine Tool, we need to nerf that, and we need to buff them in other ways. But in some cases, you don't even need to buff them; they are just retarded, like Boomy. If you nerf Star Surge by, I don't know, by around 30%, they would still be one of the top casters. So yeah, those are my thoughts. I hope we see some PvP tuning really fast, because the game at the moment it's more fun than BFA, I would say, but it's a bit too wild. I would say as well. So yeah, peace.